Hey everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're taking a look at the Unholy Death Knight on the Shadowlands beta for World of Warcraft. This is the final Death Knight spec we're looking at. We looked at Frost and Blood already here on the channel, and of course we've looked at several other specs and classes so far, and we'll be looking at all of the remaining specs over the next couple of weeks or so. So loads of Shadowlands stuff here on the channel for you already. If you are curious about the UI that I'm using in this video, that's one of the most common questions I get asked making these videos. I did do an entire video on just the basic UI. I have said up here on the beta, it's pretty rudimentary, but I think it's a nice little improvement over the basic UI that you get, the default UI of the game. And of course, I'm posting all my weak aura strings just open publicly on my Patreon page as just a little cross promotion thing. So you're welcome to jump across and grab those weak aura strings. They weren't working quite perfectly for the Unholy Death Knight, but they're working well enough, I think, to do most of the things I wanted them to do. So there you are. If you want them, they're there. Without any further ado, though, let us dive in and check out the Unholy Decay. Alright everyone, and here we are in game. Let's check out the core rotation of the Unholy Decay for people who are new to the spec or want to refresh and how the spec actually plays. Let's break down the basics here at the start of the video, and then after that we'll jump into the what's new section to check out all of the new abilities and rune forges and cool stuff coming to the Unholy Death Knight. And then of course we'll check out the Covenants and the Legendaries and all that good stuff as well. So, our basics here for playing as the Unholy Death Knight. Much like the other Death Knight specs, you have your 6 runes that you spend to use abilities. You can have up to 3 runes recharging at a time. Whenever you spend a rune, you generate 10 runic power, and you can have up to 100 runic power at a time. And again, we can spend that runic power on some other abilities. And general rule of thumb: you don't want to overcap on runic power, and you want to have at least 3 runes used every single time, like always, so that you're getting full value out of that recharge, right? Our abilities then. So, much like all the Death Knight specs, they all have their own disease, and for the Unholy Death Knight, that is the Virulent Plague. This is applied by Outbreak. This costs 1 rune. It's actually been reworked in Shadowlands, so it's different from how it was in BFA, if you're familiar with that. But this puts a 27-second damage over time effect as 1,500 shadow damage over 27 seconds. The Outbreak spell applies it in AoE. And then, special thing about the Virulent Plague is that it will explode for shadow damage in AoE, for 300 shadow damage in AoE, whenever the target that has the Virulent Plague on them dies. So that's kind of how that works. Then we have another sort of unique mechanic. Our 2 other main rune spenders here have a unique interaction for the Unholy Decay. So first up we have Festering Strike. This costs 2 runes. You smack the target for least physical damage, and you infect the target with 2 to 3 festering wounds. And then we have Scourge Strike. This costs 1 rune. You're going to strike the target for 470 physical damage and 300 shadow damage, and you'll cause 1 festering wound to burst. You can see I'm actually tracking the festering wounds here in this weak aura, and I'm tracking them, by default they're being tracked as a debuff on the target. You can see right now that you can have a maximum, by do some festering strikes, a maximum of 6 wounds on a target. And what happens when you pop this wound, it's going to do 400 extra shadow damage and generate 3 runic power. That all sounds very complicated, but the general rule of thumb is if the target has no wounds on them, I'm going to use Festering Strike to apply wounds. When they do have wounds, I'll just use Scourge Strike instead. To pop those wounds, it will do extra damage, get me some extra runic power, and we're going to be very happy. And yeah, just in a good mood. I do have, you'll see, I have a talent taken at the moment where my ghoul is going to randomly apply some wounds as well. So, like right there, for example, he just gave me a wound. Thank you, Gravel Face. What a bro. But yeah, that's the rough rule of thumb. What are we going to spend all this runic power on that we're generating? Well, Death Coil is our main runic power spender, our default baseline one as the Unholy Death Knight. This costs 40 runic power and has a 30-yard range. You fire a blast of unholy energy at the target, doing 700 shadow damage to an enemy. You can also use it to heal an undead ally for 2,800. So, for example, if Gravelface is being beaten up, I could heal him up if I wanted to. And additionally, it does reduce the cooldown of Dark Transformation by 1 second, which we'll come to in a second. But this is our main runic power spender, and that has 2 passives that interact with it. The first one is Runic Corruption, where whenever we spend runic power, each bit of runic power has a 1.4% chance to increase our rune generation rate by 100% for 3 seconds. So we'll see if we can get that to proc again. You know, at this particular level, you know, it should be something along the lines of like a, what's that? Like a, I don't know, 1.4 times 40, whatever. My math brain is not working right now. As you can see, my runic generation rate's been speeded up by that runic corruption, and it slows right down. Let's do it again, and you'll see the rune rate is going to improve if we get the proc. We did not get the proc. Let's pop some more wounds here, get more runic power, and there you go. You can see, yep, that runic corruption making that flow better. And then you also have the sudden doom proc, where your auto attacks have a chance to make your next death coil or epidemic cost no runic power. So that's just a random proc to throw into your rotation. If I melee this, you'll see it's the whatever the graphic there right away. There you go. So free death coil, which is kind of nice. This does actually work with epidemic, which is a talent as well. So that's a new thing in Shadowlands, which is nice. Then for AoE, we have another ability which ties into this as well, and that is Death and Decay. Has a 30-second cooldown, costs 1 rune. Let me get rid of this so we see the basic numbers. But you're going to do about 500 shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. And then additionally, while you stand within your Death and Decay, okay, your Scourge Strike is going to hit up to 4 enemies near the target, so it will hit 5 targets total. So this essentially fuels your AoE rotation when you go into AoE. You're going to use your Death and Decay, and then you're going to really prioritize to spam out those Scourge Strikes during Death and Decay to hit loads of extra targets, which is awesome. There you go. That is that very, very core gameplay. Then we also have a lot of big cooldowns for the Unholy Death Knight. Lots of big damage cooldowns which tie into it. Obviously, we saw Dark Transformation mentioned already. That is this one here. Has a 1-minute cooldown, and it transforms your ghoul into a undead monstrosity. So it will refill his energy and buff up all of his abilities to just become more powerful. And you can look at the ghoul abilities and see like Claw, which normally does damage, is going to become Rake, which is going to do shadow damage. It's going to do more shadow damage, and it's going to hit in AoE, so that's awesome. His Gnaw, which is by default this 1.5 minute cooldown, which is a 1 second stun, will become Dark Transformation Strike. The Dark Transformation version will strike an enemy with a smashing attack. It will do a bit of physical damage, stuns for 2 seconds. Kind of nice. Leap becomes a charge, which roots, that sort of thing. Huddle, he can reduce all damage he takes by 50% for 10 seconds. So it just powers up all of his abilities, and that's going to really fuel. In particular, it's all about that Claw, right? It's going to turn into this AoE raking effect, which is going to do a lot more damage. So that's one big damage cooldown that you have. That's reduced by Death Coil whenever you use a Death Coil. You also have Apocalypse. This is a very intriguing one, very different from a typical damage cooldown. As Apocalypse has a 1.3 minute cooldown, 75 seconds, which is very unusual. But this will do about 800 shadow damage, and it bursts up to 4 festering wounds on the target, and it's going to summon a bunch of ghouls for 15 seconds for each festering wound burst. So we want to obviously apply 4 wounds to the target. We pop this off, and we're going to get 4 of these Army of the Dead guys to come in and fight for us. So a very different sort of cooldown. Very intriguing one for sure. Army of the Dead then. This is another very intriguing cooldown. This has an 8-minute cooldown, costs 1 rune, and you're going to summon in a legion of these ghouls. So you're going to get loads of these guys in to fight for you. So massive cooldown on this one. These guys are going to hang around for 30 seconds though, and they're going to do a whole ton of damage. So Army of the Dead, very different again. And then a little bit more of a standard cooldown, I suppose. You have Summon Gargoyle, now baseline in Shadowlands, which is a 3-minute cooldown. Summon a Gargoyle into the area who's going to just attack the area for 30 seconds. And he's going to do more damage, 1% increased damage for every 2 runic power that you spend. And then you can also talent into other cooldowns as well if you want to. But yeah, you get kind of the idea. So, I mean, that very, very core gameplay of the Unholy Death Knight. I guess I popped some of these cooldowns, so I can't show them to you properly now, but you're going to go in, you're going to make sure that you keep your disease flowing on the target at all times. We're going to use our Unholy Transformation or Dark Transformation whenever we can. We're going to apply wounds with Festering Strike. We're going to pop the wounds with Scourge Strike. We're going to spend our Runic Power by default on Death Coil. We actually have Apocalypse, so I should be popping that. There we go. Let's pop Apocalypse, get that in. We're going to refresh our Outbreak because it's about to expire. We can do a Death Coil, get maybe some Runic Corruption. There we go. Apply more wounds. If we want to AoE, we'll throw down our Death and Decay, and then we're going to spam out some Scourge Strikes. Really do some nice AoE damage there. Again, we can also prioritize hitting Scourge Strikes on targets that have wounds to pop them, even during AoE with Death and Decay. Quite an interesting rotation. Yeah, a little bit of complexity for sure in the basic rotation, and then a lot of cooldowns to play around. In terms of then your defensives, these overlap very much so with the other Death Knights, the other Death Knight specs. I won't cover the stuff that's new, but you have your 15-yard range kick. That's cool. You have Death Strike, an alternate runic power spender that does heal you for a bit, so that's like a purely defensive option. That's new. I have anti-magic shield, 1 minute cooldown, which gives you 7,000 magic shield. I've got 23,000 health right now, for example, and prevents harmful magical effects being applied to you, so you can immune certain mechanics, which is really cool. Your main defensive then is Icebound Fortitude, 3 minute cooldown. Take 30% less damage for 8 seconds and become immune to all stun effects for 8 seconds as well. Unlike the other Death Knight specs, your Raise Dead to get a new ghoul only has a 30-second cooldown. Must dismiss my current pet. Hey, I'll tell you what. Let us sacrifice him hilariously. Make him explode. But yeah, we can raise dead. Now we have Worm Slicer. Rotface, whatever you were called, we salute you. Thank you for your noble sacrifice. You'll be remembered. He's gone. He's dead now. What else do we have? We can raise Ally, 10-minute cooldown. Runic Power to do a battle res on a teammate, which is very, very useful. Path of Frost. You can let your teammates walk on water, or if there's like a drop into water in a raid or something like that, which happens every few raids, you know, drop down the big shaft into a pool of water. You can murder your teammates by popping Path of Frost before they land, so that's a really good utility for raiding. Let's see. Oh, and then your main movement ability is, of course, Death's Advance. This is going to give you 35% move speed for 10 seconds. Quite minor, 45-second cooldown, but it is there. And then, of course, you have your Taunt. And the most iconic thing probably about the Death Knight, which is, of course, the Death Grip. Pull an enemy towards you, 30-yard range with a 25-second cooldown. Oh, yeah, and you can control undead as well, which is actually really nice in some of these dungeons here in the Shadowlands. You can get, like, some bonus pets for some pretty awesome stuff. And then I think the rest is mostly talents and things like that. Yeah, the rest is talents or new abilities. So there you go. That is the core gameplay of the Unholy Death Knight. It's certainly more complicated than the Frost DK or the Bled DK. One of the more complicated specs in the game. There's can be quite a bit of setup time to make sure that you've got your wounds on, pop your wounds, you know, get your cooldowns out and so on before you move into your core rotation. But that's part of the charm of the spec. But without any further ado, let's dive in. Let's check out what is new for the Unholy Death Knight. Good news for Death Knight fans, because the Unholy DK also has lots of new abilities coming baseline in the Shadowlands. First up, let's look at the rune foraging, because there's a whole bunch of new rune forages that you can do, which is fantastic. So there's still the Stone Skin Gargoyle, which is really for tanking, not going to be something you're going to use very often. And then we have the classic, of course, Rune of the Fallen Crusader, which is going to heal you for 6% and increase your strength by 15% for 15 seconds. That's just a random proc. So that was what you were using like for all of BFA, and it's obviously a very solid rune forge. And then of course there's Razor Ice, which is really for the Frost Death Knight, and that's fine. But there's a bunch of new ones, as you can see. First up, the Rune of Hysteria. Affix your rune weapon with a rune that increases maximum runic power by 20, and your attacks have a chance to increase runic power generation by 20% for 8 seconds. So this could end up being kind of intriguing for sure. Obviously you're going to see as we look through the Unholy Death Knight here that there are several like Conduits and Legendaries and new talents that are going to play around with runic power a bit more, like with your Death Coils. So that could maybe work out being kind of good for that sort of build. Or if you're building into Epidemic, this could be pretty good as well. So one to keep an eye on. Rune of Sanguination is also pretty intriguing. You get a rune that makes your Death Strike to increase damage based on the target's missing health, and when you fall below 35% health, you heal for 48% of your maximum health over 8 seconds. This seems like more of a thing for Bled DK. Death Strike is a very situational defensive runic spender compared to Death Coil, which is your main PvE one. This could see some use in PvP though. Could be nice for that as an extra defensive one. We'll see. Rune of Spell Wording then gives you a rune that deflects 3% of all spell damage and has a chance to create a shield that absorbs magic damage equal to 10% of your maximum health. And when an enemy damages the shield, their cast speed is reduced by 10% for 6 seconds. So this could be a very potent option, again, in like PvP if you're fighting a bunch of spellcasters. This could be pretty sick. Or if you're going into a Mythic Plus, perhaps with a lot of spell damage. Who knows? And I mean, also, there's the potential that they'll let us weapon swap in Mythic Plus this expansion. So you could swap into like your... swap your swords out or whatever for a Rune of Spell Wording one. Who knows? Who knows? But it's one to keep an eye on. This one here is really interesting for the Unholy Death Knight. Rune of the Apocalypse. You get a rune that gives your ghouls' attacks a chance to apply one of the following debuffs to the target. Death, healing reduction. War increases damage taken from the Death Knight. Famine reduces damage dealt to the Death Knight. Pestilence slows the target and deals damage over time. This one's pretty sick. In fact, I have this one on. So let's actually get our guy in there. Let's see. So he actually just put War, increasing damage taken. Pestilence is some damage and 30% slow. That's actually stacked up twice. There's Death again, reducing his healing by a pretty small amount. But again, seeing as you have like Dark Transformation and all of that, there you go. Reduced damage dealt to Nubkeks. So kind of interesting. These are proccing all the time. Quite intriguing. I think this one could be really good for PvP. This could be very good for PvP with the Unholy DK, and obviously it's better for them than the other Death Knight specs because your ghoul is up all of the time, whereas they can have a maximum of 50% uptime on their ghoul. Yours is up all the time, and you have a number of abilities like Dark Transformation and so on and so forth that are going to make your ghoul better. So this one could be pretty good for you. Pretty cool. And then the final one here is the Rune of Unending Thirst, which is really for leveling, I think, and world content. You have a rune that gives you 10% move speed and 10% haste and a 5% max HP heal whenever you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. And it also increases movement speed while dead by 10%. So yeah, this is going to be a really powerful one for leveling and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think a lot of interesting choices there, and you may be switching up your runes quite often actually in Shadowlands, which I think is quite an exciting thing. So that's pretty cool. All right, other new abilities then for Unholy DK. Well, actually, first of all, we have one thing that is changing, which is your Outbreak, your Virulent Plague. In BFA, you would put this on a target, and then they would, I think every time it dealt damage, it would have a chance to erupt and apply that plague and spread that plague. This has been changed. It's a lot simpler now. Now it is simply a 27-second dot. That will do damage in AoE when enemies die, right? So if the enemy dies with your Virulent Plague on them, they're going to explode for 300 shadow damage. It no longer automatically spreads, but Outbreak does apply it in AoE. So this works a lot more like the Frost DK version, right? You just Outbreak, it's like whatever. What's it called? The thing? Their Howling Blast or whatever. It's quite like that. Outbreak just does a bit of shadow damage. It applies the dot in AoE. But like if more mobs come in now, I'm going to have to hit those mobs with Outbreak as well to get the plague on them. The plague will no longer automatically spread. It does have that higher duration though. But yeah, you're just going to press the Outbreak button a bit more frequently compared to BFA. It's a minor change, but there you are. Kind of goes with the target capping changes. Apocalypse then now has a 75-second cooldown, so I think that has been reduced slightly from BFA, which of course is your one of your main cooldowns. You do 800 shadow damage roughly. It will burst up to 4 festering wounds and summon an army of the dead ghoul for 15 seconds per wound burst. Now that again, it has a 1.3 minute cooldown, which is very unusual, and there you are. That is in there, so cool. Summon Gargoyle then is now baseline, so this is awesome. This has a 3-minute cooldown. You summon a gargoyle into the area to bombard the target for 30 seconds, and the gargoyle is going to do 1% increased damage for every 2 runic power that you spend. So this certainly adds more motivation for spending runic power into the Unholy Death Knight spec. I think it's quite cool, like the more runic power you spend, the more powerful your gargoyle is going to be. The gargoyle does quite a lot of damage. He looks very cool. So yeah, I think a welcome addition to have this guy come in as just a baseline cooldown. He's just there. It's every 3 minutes, so it's not going to be up that often, but when it is, it's going to do a ton of work. And then also, finally, a very nice bonus is that your Mastery, Dreadblade, now increases not only your shadow damage, but the damage of all of your minions as well. So that's your ghouls, your army of the dead ghouls, your gargoyle, all that good stuff is now all being affected by your Mastery, so it makes that Mastery stat much better in terms of scaling up and scaling your damage. So that is a very, very cool change. So yeah, there are a few really nice Unholy DK specific changes. But wait, there's more. So, of course, much like all the Death Knight specs, Anti-Magic Zone is now a new baseline ability. 2-minute cooldown, place an Anti-Magic Zone for 10 seconds on the ground that reduces spell damage taken by party or raid members by 20%. So, what a badass ability. This is a huge perk a huge, massive increase to your rage utility and to your group utility. I mean, amazing to keep your healer alive in PvP, or keep you or your teammates alive in PvP if you're being tunneled by some casters. Amazing for big bursts of magic damage in raids or in dungeons. Just absolutely fantastic. Again, this is something along the lines of like Darkness for Havoc Demon Hunters, or Rallying Cry for the Warriors. This is a really, really awesome bit of utility. So fantastic addition to the Death Knight kit. You also are going to have Chains of Ice now baseline. So this is an 8-second, 70% move speed slow, costs 1 rune. So this is, you know, could have some uses for some kiting strategies in PvE. This is mostly, though, a big PvP thing. So yeah, a spammable slow essentially is going to make you a much more of a nightmare to escape from. So very nice to see that one come in. We also have Lichborn is now also a baseline ability, 2-minute cooldown. You become undead for 10 seconds, get 10% leech, and are immune to charms, fears, and sleeps. So that has, I mean, the leech, it's only a small bit of leech, but that's a nice little perk, you know, a small little defensive buff. Mostly, of course, this is all about becoming immune to the charms, the fears, the sleep. So avoiding those crowd controls, amazing in PvP, amazing in certain niche circumstances in PvE as well. Some dungeons, this is going to be awesome. So that is really great to see come in. And of course, has a synergy with Death Coil, because Death Coil will heal an undead ally for 2,800 health. Well, if I go Lichborn, I can actually heal myself. So let me just generate enough runic power here. So if I go Lichborn, you can see, bam, I can actually heal myself for that amount, which is pretty sick. So some definite niche uses for that, where you can, you know, spend your runic power to heal yourself in that little window, which is kind of cool, kind of damn cool. So there you go, a little perk, a little flavor bit there, which is cool and could be quite useful. And then finally, Sacrificial Pact, which I think you saw me use already, but you can sacrifice your ghoul to do 800 shadow damage to up to 8 nearby enemies, and it will also heal you for 25% of your maximum health. This one is maybe a little bit more awkward to use for the Unholy DK than for the other Death Knights. I mean, the good news is that your Raised Dead has only a 30-second cooldown, so it's going to be very likely that you can get your ghoul right back up. This is essentially like an emergency situation boost of max health, or it could be a good little burst of AoE damage, because it does do a good chunk of AoE damage. It's not too shabby. Of course, you want to be careful not to kill your ghoul while he's in Dark Transformation, because that would end up being a big damage loss if you're still in the middle of a fight. But it's certainly an interesting one. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's cool. And it does give you more of a reason to you know, kill off your pet and raise dead in different circumstances. It's just got, you know, there's a variety of ways you can use this, which I think is nice. Of course, just be careful. Don't kill your pet while he's doing something awesome. Otherwise, you're going to be very, very sad as the Unholy DK. You also have a few leveling perks as well, so just some nice minor benefits. The first one is, the first minor perk is the Summon Gargoyle rank 2. That's the effect where your Gargoyle does more damage for every 2 runic power that you spend. So that's a leveling perk, which is it's a pretty awesome leveling perk, has to be said. You're also going to get Scourge Strike rank 2, just makes it do 20% more damage. So nothing too exciting there. It's just more damage, whatever. And then probably one of the best leveling perks is Dark Transformation rank 2. Which is going to make Dark Transformation now give your ghoul 100% energy when he transforms. So this is fantastic. It was one of those things that maybe some people did, maybe other people didn't do. But of course, you know, when your ghoul transforms, his claw turns into his Dark Transformation version, which is going to do way more damage, almost twice as much damage, and of course it's shadow damage compared to physical, so it's going to do even more because it's not affected by armor, and hits an AoE. And especially with something like Infected Claws, where your ghoul can apply Festering Wounds to the target. You could min-max this, and you could actually control, like in BFA, you could control and like turn off the autocast on Claw to make sure that your ghoul would go into Dark Transformation with full energy. That was kind of a bit finicky. That's a very min-max sort of thing that's not very intuitive, especially for newer players. So this works very well. It just removes that whole hassle, and you could just make sure that, hey, my ghoul's going to go in. When he goes Dark Transformation, he has the full energy. He's going to start blasting with Claw. I don't need to like be fiddling with these autocast abilities and pet AI and all that not so fun stuff. It's just going to work, and it's going to work well and consistently. So pretty awesome change. Minor change, but pretty good, I think. In terms of of your talent changes for the Unholy DK. Most of the talent tree is still the same, apart from a few buffs, but there's been a few reworked talents and a few new talents as well. So going from the bottom, the first big one to draw attention to is Unholy Blight. This is now better. So this is a 45-second cooldown, costs 1 rune. You surround yourself with a swarm of vile insects. Let me pop it over here. Vile insects for 6 seconds that will sting all nearby enemies and infect them with an unholy disease that does 450 damage over 14 seconds, and it stacks up to 4 times. As you could see right there when I did it, the effect does pandemic, so it actually lasts longer, and it keeps refreshing. So this is maybe going to last, I don't know, roughly about 20 seconds or so, maybe a little bit longer than that. Quite a good uptime, and this actually does a lot of damage. So against those 2 targets, for instance, my Unholy Blight just did 7.5 thousand damage. So, you know, it's doing about roughly, let's say about 3,500 damage to each target, which is quite substantial. You know, consider like 3,500 damage, consider that Death Coil is doing 700 damage, or Epidemic is doing 300 shadow damage, plus an additional 100 in cleave. 3,500, that's a lot of damage, and it now has the additional effect, well, now it stacks, which is cool, I think, and it will make my minions do 5% increased damage per stack to enemies infected by Unholy Blight. So it's quite quick to stack this up to 4 stacks. That's 20% increased damage from my minions. So that's going to synergize incredibly well with Army of the Dead, with Apocalypse, with my Dark Transformation Ghoul. All of that good stuff is going to work really well with this. So this talent saw a lot of love, and it's really going to come up in the world for sure. I think it's going to be a much... This looks really good right now, is my initial impression. At level 35 then, it is worth noting, actually, level 35, that Harbinger of Doom, where Sudden Doom triggers more often and can accumulate up to 2 charges. Of course, the baseline change, where Sudden Doom now works with Epidemic. So that's actually really good. So Harbinger of Doom becomes a lot better. It's not just giving you more death coils, which is, you know, in a dungeon, not too great. This is now going to give you more epidemics, which could be very good for some AoE. And Soul Reaper at level 35 has been reworked entirely. This is now an 8-second cooldown execute ability. This costs 1 rune. You strike an enemy for about 500 shadow damage, and you afflict the enemy with Soul Reaper. After 5 seconds, if the target is below 35% health, this effect will explode, doing an additional 1,600 shadow damage to the target. If an enemy dies while afflicted, you gain Runic Corruption, so guaranteed Runic Corruption if it doesn't go off. This very simply is, you know, it's awesome. It's an execute ability, super strong for some single target, with a short cooldown as well, so pretty fantastic. I mean, if you compare it to a Scourge Strike's doing 400 damage, physical damage plus 300 shadow damage, and it's going to burst your Festering Wounds. So, you know, you definitely would not use this ability above 35% health, but when they are in that execute range, this is going to do a lot of damage. So yeah, Unholy DK has an execute ability now. Kind of insane. At level 45 then, Defile got a little bit of a buff, and that could be pretty relevant because it's not implemented yet. It's not working yet, but with the Night Fae Covenant ability, which we'll come to in a couple of seconds, that is going to work with Defile. Again, not working right now, but it is planned to, so Defile could be very useful in that situation. But Defile, which of course replaces Death and Decay with the shorter cooldown version. It grows in size. It does a bit more damage as well. That now also ramps up its damage, so you can see those damage ticks are doing more and more each tick, just slightly more each tick, while enemies stay inside the Defile. So pretty cool. Defile now a bit of ramping damage built in as well. Kind of a small change, but nice. The biggest change, of course, is to your level 50 row, which has been quite reworked. Army of the Damned is still there. This is where Death Coil reduces the cooldown of Apocalypse by 1 second and Army of the Dead by 5 seconds. This does not appear to... Oh, no, it does, sorry. It does work with the Epidemic. That's cool. I don't believe that Epidemic reduces the cooldown of your Dark Transformation, though. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. But it does work, sorry, with Army of the Damned. This is going to, Death Coil or Epidemic reduce the cooldown of Apocalypse by 1 second and Army of the Dead by 5 seconds. Additionally, Apocalypse and Army of the Dead will summon a Magus of the Dead for 15 seconds who will throw frost bolts and shadow bolts at your foes. So quite nice. You're going to get your little wizard in there, which is quite fun. Let's see if we can get him in there. I mean, I'll summon in my Army of the Dead. And there he is. There's my Magus of the Dead, so he's just going to start blasting. He's going to do his thing. I believe this was an Azurite trait. I think it's just very visually cool. Have your little Magus in there. Of course, if I go in and I get a couple of wounds on this, we'll do our Apocalypse. I'm going to get another Magus. I'm going to have my 2 Magus buddies. We could drop in like our Unholy Blight and even up their damage even more, which is a whole lot of fun. There you can see we can use our Epidemic with our Sudden Doom procs. Pretty cool. All that good stuff. So those Maguses, they're going to come in and... I'm not sure exactly where it shows up. There we go. There's the Shadow Bolts going in there. They'll probably do some Frost Bolts as well. I'm not sure if that... doesn't look like that's showing up. But yeah, Magus of the Dead. Quite fun. And obviously getting the big cooldown reduction on both those abilities is nice. Unholy Pact then is our next one here. This is a new talent too. Where Dark Transformation, I think this is also based off an Azurite trait, will create an unholy pact between you and your pet, igniting flaming chains that do about 4,000 shadow damage over 15 seconds to enemies between you and your pet. And while active, your strength is increased by 8%. So again, if we go into this, I'm going to pop Dark Transformation, and bam, there you go. Let's see. So this guy is still getting hit by that. This guy's still getting hit by that. So it's quite a generous AoE. Like, the AoE is not too shabby. Like, you will get the value out of the AoE. It's not bad at all. It's quite nifty, quite fun, and obviously the strength benefit. I was playing with this one. It feels really, really good. Makes Dark Transformation more impactful, easy to get that AoE damage out, and the strength benefit is fantastic too. So that's pretty cool. And then finally we have Unholy Strike, which is a replacement for, or a rework of Unholy Frenzy. This now has a 1.3 minute cooldown, which means it does sync up perfectly with Apocalypse. This costs 2 runes. It's going to do 1,300 shadow damage, infect the target with 4 festering wounds, and send you into a killing frenzy, increasing haste by 15% for 12 seconds. So a big purpose of this was to speed up the opening rotation of the Unholy Death Knight. This used to be Unholy Frenzy, which gave you haste, but then gave your attacks a chance to apply festering wounds. They've now just baked this, so you would have to go in, you'd have to do like 2 festering strikes to get the 4 wounds guaranteed, then pop with Apocalypse, then pop this, and then you'd also have your Gargoyle, your Dark Transformation. If you have Unholy Blight, you'd have that as well. It could take a long time to get into your rotation, so they kind of simplified this where we can go in, we like apply Outbreak, we can do our Unholy Strike, then we can pop them with this, you know, we can summon that in, change our guy up, whatever. I didn't do my Gargoyle right there, but that doesn't matter too much. You sort of get the idea, and we're kind of going straight in, and we're already blasting. It just sort of smooths out that rotation, which I think is quite nice. I think it's a nice little change. Gonna feel really good to have this in single target. It does sync up perfectly. And of course, generating the 4 festering wounds is exactly how much you want for Apocalypse. So the two go hand in hand. You'll have that haste boost go through your Apocalypse. It's gonna feel pretty good. So yeah, it's just, you know, kind of just quicker, smoother diving into your Apocalypse. Yeah, with the Unholy Strike, which I think is nice, and yeah, works well. So there you go. Like I said, some nice buffs, some nice perks to the Unholy Death Knight talent tree. It's definitely a big improvement, I think, over its BFA version. All right, well, let us dive into maybe the most exciting part, which is the Covenant abilities for the Unholy DK. So first of all, let's check out the Kyrians. They have their little guy here, the Steward, so he'll give you a Phial of Serenity, which is essentially like another health stone, right? It has 3 charges. You can use 1 charge per combat encounter. It's going to restore 15% health, and it removes all diseases, poisons, curses, and bleeds that are affecting you. So great for PvP. Could be very good in some niche circumstances in PvE as well. There's lots of those effects around here at the start of Shadowlands because of this ability probably, so that's nice. Your Covenant ability then is called Shackle the Unworthy. So this has a 1 minute cooldown. You admonish your target for their past transgressions, reducing the damage they deal to you by 5% and doing 2,200 arcane damage over 14 seconds. Additionally, while it's active on the enemy, rune spending attacks reduce the cooldown by 4 seconds. So this certainly fits into the Frost DK rotation, you know, reasonably well. Sorry, the Frost DK, the Unholy DK, because you do have some downtime. I think it's certainly maybe a bit hard to get it out at the start. And yeah, I mean, if we just fire it off here on pull, like, why the hell not? Why the hell not? Let's fire off some more abilities. There we go. All these sudden death things. We'll see exactly how the cooldown's looking here at the end. So it's about to expire. There you go. It just expired. We actually got that down to a 5-second cooldown. So yeah, I mean, like, just a quick example on pull, you're going to see that this is going to have very, very high uptime on targets. So it could be kind of nice. And with your conduits, you do have a potency conduit for the Kyrian called Proliferation, which is going to give Shackle the Unworthy a chance to spread to nearby enemies each time it deals damage. Not sure exactly how the ranks in this are working right now, but all you need to know, I think, in particular, is that you can use a conduit to make this work in AoE, which is, you know, obviously otherwise its big weakness. It's good single target damage with really good uptime, but doesn't do anything in AoE. Well, you can use that conduit to make it work in AoE, which is pretty cool. For the Night Fae then, this one is very exciting. Right, this one is very exciting. So the signature ability for them is called Soul Shape. You can turn into a Vulpin, blinking 15 yards forward and gaining 50% movement speed. And again, you can reactivate it as this flicker ability every 4 seconds for more 15-yard blinks. So mobility for the Death Knight, it's there in this this Covenant, which is awesome. So really, really cool. It does last 12 seconds with a 1.5 minute cooldown. It is indefinite, as you saw there in the rest area. You can use this for as long as you want. You can be a beautiful Death Knight sparkly fox if you want to. The cool thing about their Covenant ability is that it just improves your death and decay. It turns it into Death's Due, which does, I think it does the same amount of damage with the same cooldown, same rune cost. However, the big difference here is that enemies that you damage with the Death and Decay, it's not going to work against these. I'll show you the visual though. The visual's awesome, but it's going to reduce the damage they do to you by 1%, up to a maximum of minus 15% damage to you. And it's also going to then buff your strength. It's going to transfer that damage reduction into you as strength. So essentially, it's just more damage reduction in AoE and lots more strength in AoE to really boost your AoE damage rotation. Now, what is not working right now is Defile. If I take Defile, it replaces the Covenant ability, but Blizzard has said they are working on this and that the two will actually work together. So in other words, that you're going to have the Death's Due effect stacked with Defile. So if you take the Defile talent and you go with the Night Fae, you're going to have a 20-second cooldown, super duper Death and Decay, which is going to grow in size, do increasing damage every tick. It's going to do more damage than the baseline Death and Decay, and it's also going to be sucking out the enemy's strength, boosting up your strength, and lowering the damage that they're going to do to you. So this could be super, super enticing. You're almost definitely, it looks like, could be very, very pushed towards Defile if you go with the Night Fae, but it's just going to give you a constant benefit. It's obviously going to, you know, it's a nice little strength boost, so you're going to use this in single target for the strength boost, which is really good. Obviously, it's going to reduce damage that bosses and mobs do to you, which is always a nice perk. And it's going to be great for AoE because it's going to give you strength when you're going to be spamming out those Scourge Strikes in AoE. So that's going to work really well as well. So yeah, pretty exciting option there, I think, for the Unholy DK with the Death's Due from the Night Fae. Their potency conduit, before we look at the Venthyr, is called Withering Ground, where Death's Due will do more damage. Starting at 15%, you can go as high as 50% more damage from Death's Due. I don't think that it necessarily does a massive ton of damage, but of course, bear in mind that it is shadow damage with Defile. Defile already does more damage, so you could stack the Defile with that conduit, and then of course that's going to work with your Mastery, where you're going to do more shadow damage. So all of that stuff could stack together and make that conduit actually work pretty well for the Unholy Death Knight. With the Venthyr, their signature ability is called Door of Shadows. It's a 1 minute cooldown, 1.5 second cast with a 35-yard range. It's a point and click teleport, which is pretty awesome actually for Death Knight. This feels really, really good. Big chunk of burst mobility. You can see your ghouls just going to teleport over there with you, which is really nice. So that's very, very awesome. Their Covenant ability is called Swarming Mist. This has a 1 minute cooldown, and you can see it's going to generate 3 runic power for every enemy it hits. We're getting 6 runic power here per tick with 2 targets, right? So this lasts for 8 seconds. It's going to give you 10% dodge for those 8 seconds. And it's going to do about 280 shadow damage every second to enemies within 10 yards. And every time it does damage, you gain 3 runic power to a maximum of 15. So if you're fighting 5 enemies, you're going to get 15 runic power every single second. So that's an epidemic every 2 seconds you get out of this for free, which is awesome. So this is going to be a very powerful AoE burst Covenant ability on a pretty short 1 minute cooldown, which is, yeah, I think that's pretty appealing, pretty nice. So there you are. I would say that it does rely perhaps a little bit on Epidemic to really make sense for the Unholy DK, though, in my opinion. The potency conduit for this is going to up its damage and dodge chance by 5% for the first 4 seconds. That goes up to 30% bonus. So 30% more damage and 30% more dodge. So for a total of 40% dodge for those first 4 seconds, the first half of the ability. So I think that's also pretty good. That could be great for PvP. Give it some usage in PvP for lots of dodge chance. Very good for some solo play as well for that dodge chance. And just more burst damage is quite nice. Then finally we have the Necrolords. Their signature ability is Fleshcraft. This is the 4 second channel with a 2 minute cooldown. It's going to form a shield equal to 20% of your maximum health. So right now for me, this is a 4,700 damage shield. If you channel it near corpses, it will grow more powerful. It can be as strong as 50% of your maximum health. And the shield, as you see, does last for 2 minutes. So you could channel this between packs and Mythic Plus, go into like a difficult pull in Mythic Plus with a 50% health shield, which is awesome. This could help you do some soak mechanics in raiding, stuff like that. So I think this one is pretty solid. Very Death Knight as well. And he has that unholy visual to it. And then their Covenant ability is called Abomination Limb. Sprout an additional limb for 12 seconds. Every 1 second, it does 230 shadow damage to all nearby enemies and pulls an enemy to your location if they're further than 8 yards away from you. So this is pretty sick, actually. This is pretty cool. It has a 2-minute cooldown. So here we go. We're going to pop this guy off, and he's going to start doing AoE. You can see there's the pull effect going off on this guy over there. We need to be careful because this guy will murder us, actually. Please don't kill me. I'm nice, I swear. He just killed my pet, in fact. So yeah, this lasts for a long time. It's a big burst AoE cooldown. Actually, one intriguing thing I'm noticing there, I suspect that these have different scalings. For the other 2 Death Knight specs, this did more damage than the Mist. It does look like the Mist, actually, this is kind of weird, does more shadow damage by default. I wonder if the scaling is a bit wonky with the Death Knight Mastery right now. I can tell you for the other 2 Death Knight specs that this did more damage per tick than Swarming Mist did, but it's different for Unholy, so that's one to look out for. You guys can check that out closer to release when they've done the tuning passes. Just make sure that stuff is working with Mastery. This, I think, should do more damage per tick than Swarming Mist, and the idea being that this is going to be more burst damage than Swarming Mist, but you only get 1 cast every 2 minutes compared to Swarming Mist, which is every 1 minute. And whereas Swarming Mist is giving you lots of runic power and a bit of dodge chance, this one is giving you that utility of all those extra grips. So dirty in PvP. You know, you're just going to constantly be gripping enemies in and stacking them up. That's absolutely horrible and terrifying. Just pulling them back in on top of your ghouls, into your Unholy Blight, into your Gargoyle, all of that, into your Death and Decay. Really nasty in PvP. Could be so sick. Just terrifying. How to get away from an Unholy Death Knight who's got the grips. They got the slows now. Then they have the Abomination Limb. It's going to be a nightmare for casters, that's for sure. It's still useful in PvE as well for grouping up mobs, so maybe not as useful as it will be in PvP with that effect. And then, of course, the conduit for this is called Brutal Grasp, where Abomination Limb will do 50% increased damage to enemies it pulls to you. That goes up to 125% increased damage. So, again, just so dirty for PvP. That's going to do so much damage in PvP. Very terrifying. So, there you go, guys. They are the Covenants for the Unholy Death Knight. Again, so it's a little bit weird with the tuning. For the Venthyr one, like, and the Necrolord one seems to be doing less damage, a lot less damage than it should be doing, which is a bit of a bummer, but I'm sure that will be fixed. But I think you got a lot of interesting choices there, like just looking at the abilities alone. Necrolord, big 2-minute burst AoE cooldown, which also has that gripping effect. So good for PvP, and even really good for PvE as well, in a lot of circumstances. You got the Swarming Mist, which has a bit of a defensive benefit with the dodge chance, and is also going to do, good AoE damage on a short 1-minute cooldown and give you lots and lots of runic power to fuel your rotation. So creative place to do with that one. You got the Night Fae, which is very attractive. Synergies with Defile, not yet implemented, but planned to be implemented by Blizzard, which is awesome. So that's going to give you some consistent damage reduction and, very importantly, very consistent sources of haste on that short cooldown. Again, 30 seconds by default or 20 seconds only with Defile. So that could be really nice. But then you've got the Kyrian. Again, the least interesting one, I would say, for the Death Knight is just a big single target dot with very good uptime. It can spread in AoE, though, with the Conduit. So not the most exciting thing in the world, but possibly a very good source of damage. Lacking some of the utility effects of the other ones. Could be very good source of damage, though. So there you go. Lots of interesting Covenant choices for the Unholy Death Knight. For your Legendaries, then, you can equip 1 Legendary at a time at the start of Shadowlands, and there are 4 Legendaries available to all the Death Knight specs, and then 4 that are specific to you as an Unholy Death Knight. Let's check out the general ones first. The first one is called Death's Embrace. This is going to double the duration of Anti-Magic Shell and make it heal you for any damage that it absorbs. So it could be useful for some, niche circumstances in PvE. Could be very powerful against casters in PvP. So I think this one's pretty cool. It's not something that you're going to use all the time, but there will be certain specific circumstances where this one could be very nice. The next one is called Grip of the Everlasting. For 3 seconds after casting Death Grip, you can cast the spell a second time without regard for its cooldown. So pretty nice too. Again, get 2 Death Grips out in a row. Again, some very niche circumstances in PvE where you'll use this. Or again, could be really good for PvP. Like, I'm just thinking you stack the Abomination Limb with this one, with the Grip of the Everlasting, and you're kind of going, I run away. I'm a hunter, I run away, I get gripped in. I run away again, he grips me in again 3 seconds later. I run away again, and he does Abomination Limb, and you're just going like, I can't escape. So could see some uses. I think this, it's a bit more rare that this will be useful, but could be kind of intriguing. Then our third option, this one looks really, really good, especially with the Night Fae. And with the Defile talent. This one is called Pheromones. You and your minions gain 10% haste while you're inside your Death and Decay, and enemies damaged by Death and Decay have a chance to cower in place for 3 seconds. I think this one's going to be insane for the Unholy Death Knight. Obviously, it's going to boost up your Army of the Dead. It's going to boost up your Apocalypse minions, your Ghoul, your Dark Transformation Ghoul, your Gargoyle. All that stuff should get 10% haste while in the Death and Decay, which is nutty. And obviously it also has that wonderful CC effect, just interrupting casts, stopping mobs attacking your tank, just randomly proccing, but proccing quite frequently. So this one looks super powerful. And again, of course, with the Night Fae, your Death and Decay is already something that you're going to be using as a core part of your rotation. Even in single target, which is going to synergize really well with this. It's going to give you stacking strength as well to go with that haste. And then, of course, if you take Defile, and again, they're not working together right now, but they will, you're going to have this be on a 20-second cooldown. You're going to have the size increase, so making it easier with that size increase with Defile, making it easier to have your minions inside that, making it easier for you to be inside that, get more enemies inside it for more CC. So I think this one is looking pretty nuts for Unholy Death Knight. And then finally we have the Shadowgas Breastplate, where your Virulent Plague will also apply Frost Fever and Blood Plague. So this could be pretty good too. Like, I think Blood Plague is also shadow damage, so that will scale with your mastery. Frost Fever is frost damage, it won't scale with your mastery. But Blood Plague is going to heal you for some of the damage that it does. Frost Fever has a chance to give you 5 runic power every time it ticks. So this one could be pretty nifty. Again, if I show you this, show this to you right now. Pretty nice, right? It's going to add up to just a lot more just AoE damage, right, with those multi-dots, which is, as far as it's working right now, this is uncapped. You can hit as many enemies as you want with this, get those dots up and as many enemies as you want, which is pretty damn good. So yeah, I think this one is pretty cool. You know, it's going to do a fairly substantial amount of damage. Like, Virulent Plague is still doing, in this case, the most damage, but they're doing a little bit for sure. It's not too bad. And of course, you're getting that extra healing, you're getting that extra runic power. So definitely some usage from this one. It's going to depend on numbers tuning. But at least there's a couple of nice little perks baked into this one as well, which is cool. For the Unholy specific ones, which are maybe the more exciting one, the first one we have here is called the Deadliest Coil. The names, I have to check the names because they're not implemented in the game properly yet for most specs. But this reduces the runic power cost of Death Coil by 10. And Death Coil will increase the duration of Dark Transformation by 2 seconds. So this one is pretty nice. It brings Death Coil from 40 runic power down to 30, which certainly feels good. It's going to give you a better flow to the spec. It's going to give you more chances to proc your runic corruption and have a better uptime, which is nice. And of course, more uptime on Dark Transformation is a big damage increase to your Ghoul. So that could end up being pretty good. Again, we'll have to see. It certainly feels good to play with. The next one is called Death Certainty. Death Strike and Death Coil do 10% increased damage. Pretty straightforward. Reduces the remaining cooldown of Defile by 2 seconds. So again, this is really an appeal if you're using Defile and if you're with the Night Fae. Get more cooldown reduction, get more of these up. That could be good. Will it compete with Pheromones? I'm not sure, but it could be a decent option. Let me see. Does it work with Epidemic? I don't think it does. No, it doesn't work with Epidemic, so that is certainly a concern. Does not appear to work with Epidemic yet. But yeah, I mean, like, it's certainly in there, could be interesting. And of course, both of these have an interesting interaction, I'd say, with Harbinger of Doom, where you get more sudden Doom procs and you can stack it up. So again, you could, get more procs. More procs of Sudden Doom means more uptime on Dark Transformation. More procs of Sudden Doom means more cooldown reduction on Death and Decay. Could be good options for AoE, we'll have to see. Then the third one here is called Frenzied Monstrosity. This one seems very nice. Dark Transformation increases the attack speed and damage of you and your monstrosity by 20%. This has a very good combo, I would say, with Unholy Pact. I believe this is what I was using in the footage that you're going to watch. So just way more damage for you and Monstrosity. With Unholy Pact, you're getting 8% strength while your Monstrosity is active, so that's awesome. And of course, just your Monstrosity does way more damage. You do way more damage. That's pretty good. When you're stacking cooldowns like Unholy Blight with that as well, I think that it starts to work really, really well. So this one's looking quite nice. Relatively straightforward, but it's going to be satisfying. You know, just hey, you know, more attack speed. It's great. More damage with those cooldown stacks. And then finally, we have the Reanimated Shambler. Let's see if we can get a visual on this guy. So your attacks have a chance to summon a super zombie who shuffles forward and explodes, doing 1,500 shadow damage and applying a festering wound to up to 8 nearby enemies. The proc chance is, I believe, fairly low. I mean, let's just beat on this stuff. I think it only procs like once or twice per minute. I think it's 1.5 procs per minute. So it's not the most frequent thing in the world. Come on, buddy. You wanna show up here? Doesn't want to show up yet. I'll beat on him until he does. There he is! There he is! He's going somewhere. Boom! He explodes. Oh, he didn't actually hit the other totem. That sucks. So I actually had to dismiss my pet and everything. I was doing just our core rotation. And then I realized that there had been a zombie in there exploding. I just hadn't seen him with like the death's due and all of the frickin' summons and everything. Is actually visually hard to see. Oh, there's another one. There he goes. But yeah, he's cool. He'll go in there. He'll explode. Do some alright damage. So yeah, that's definitely a fun one. I think, again, that was an artifact trait or something like that. So he doesn't proc all that often, but when he does proc, he's going to be pretty good for some AoE damage. Obviously, applying Festering Wounds is going to help your AoE rotation as well. Just, you know, pop through those targets, pop those wounds. It's going to be pretty satisfying. So yeah, not a terrible one. And I think it's a pretty decent set of legendaries for the Unholy Death Knight. You've got some things that are going to synergize with some Death Coil builds. You've got, you know, things boosting Dark Transformation, which is super fun. Getting cooldown reduction on Death and Decay is fun. You know, exploding suicide zombies is quite fun. Getting that big boost. I mean, this is the one I was using, which is just, it's kind of bland, but it is just a bunch more damage to stack up with your cooldowns, or then the pheromones, some nice utility ones. So good selection there for sure with the legendaries for the Death Knight. For your conduits for the Unholy DK, there are 3 different types of conduits, and these are going to slot into your soulbind trees. And you'll see an example in the background of the sort of path you could take through a soulbind tree and choose the sort of sockets that you want. Endurance sockets are going to boost your survivability. Finesse are going to boost your utility, and potency are going to boost your damage. Let's look at the endurance ones first for the Unholy DK. There are 3 right now. Hardened Bones is the first one. While Lichborn is active, the damage you take is reduced by 5%. This scales up to 15% damage reduction. So turns Lichborn, aside from being a little bit of a leech cooldown and helping you break out of some CC effects, it's also going to give you a bit of damage reduction, which is a nice little perk. Insatiable Appetite is next. It's going to increase the minimum healing of Deathstrike by 1%, and that goes up to an 8% bonus. So this is going to be something that's good, I think, for solo play, for some world questing, and might be nice for a bit of extra survivability in some PvE situations or PvP. But I'm not sure if it's going to be one that you're going to really prioritize as the Unholy DK, because you're not going to be death striking that often. Finally, we have Reinforced Shell. Anti-Magic Zone's radius is increased by 10%, and the duration is increased by 1 second. This actually goes up to 8 seconds of extra duration, making Anti-Magic Zone last for 18 seconds at maximum rank of this conduit. So this is going to be incredible for PvP. You know, if you are able to stay inside your anti-magic zone and you're against a magic team in arena, they are going to absolutely hate you. That's a lot of protection for your squad. And could even be good for some PvE situations. I'm not sure if there's many fights where you're going to want an 18-second anti-magic zone, but if there are any fights where that is something relevant and you don't have to move out of it, or like the burst damage does last that long, this is going to be very attractive. Certainly the extra radius is a nice perk. It's going to make it easier for your raid team to get into that, which is pretty cool. So not a terrible one by any means. For the finesse conduits for the Unholy DK, the first one is Chilled Resilience. Icebound Fortitude's cooldown is reduced by 15 seconds. This goes down to 60 seconds of cooldown reduction, bringing Icebound Fortitude from a 3-minute cooldown to a 2-minute cooldown. So I think that's really good. Great for PvP. Get that big cooldown out more often. Great for PvE. Same thing. So a very welcome addition. That's going to be a good one. Fleeting Wind is next. Death's Advance will grant an additional 10% movement speed for the first 3 seconds. This goes up to a 30% additional movement speed for the first 3 seconds. So in total, that means when you pop Death's Advance, you're going to get 65% movement speed for 3 seconds when you pop this, which is a great big burst of speed. So that's quite nice. It could make it less necessary to talent into, for example, Wraith Walk in your talent tree, or to grab Soulbind, Covenant abilities that give movement speed. If this is enough movement speed, it's going to be great. It's going to be great for PvP. More movement speed for Death Knight's always good. I mean, just in general, actually, more movement speed for Death Knight's always good. So I think this is a good conduit. The next one is called Spirit Drain. Successfully interrupting an enemy with Mind Freeze grants 10 runic power. It looks like this probably scales up to 40 runic power when you successfully interrupt, which is really, really good, actually. That's going to help fuel your epidemics and AoE, get out more death coils, which are going to have good synergy with some of those legendaries that we looked at. So I think this is a pretty solid conduit that's going to reward skillful play with interrupts, which is great. And then finally, Unending Grip. Death Grip slows enemy movement speed by 25% for until cancelled. So I'm not sure exactly how long this lasts. Maybe like 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. And and it's going to scale up to 60% slower movement speed. So, I mean, pretty disgusting. If you've got the unending grip here, this conduit, and you take the legendary where you can do 2 grips within 3 seconds of each other, and then you have the Necrolord Covenant ability, Abomination Limb, gripping people back in. That's a whole lot of grips. That's going to be a nightmare for casters in PvP, and I think this conduit is probably mostly for PvP. Looking at the potency conduits for the Unholy Death Knight then, there are 4 of these. The first one is Convocation of the Dead. When a festering wound bursts, the cooldown of Apocalypse is reduced by half a second. So this one is, I think, pretty nice actually. This could be really, really good. This is going to scale up from, it looks like, half a second cooldown reduction to 3.5 second cooldown reduction, which is a whole ton of cooldown reduction. The big thing that jumps out to me with this is obviously it's a little bit awkward to sync up your cooldowns. It's a bit awkward as a Death Knight. It's a little bit awkward as Unholy DK, and this could help bring them together. So, for example, with the Unholy Blight, that's a 45-second cooldown, and that will often sync up, you know, fairly regularly with your Dark Transformation, because whenever you Death Coil, that reduces Dark Transformation, so not too bad. But Apocalypse then doesn't sync up with that at all, being a 75-second cooldown. That's way off the 45-second cooldown. Possibly with this Conduit, you could actually sync up Apocalypse and actually just have an Unholy Blight, Dark Transformation, and Apocalypse nearly every single time stacking up. Or you'd only have to delay each of those abilities a small amount. And that could actually work out really well. One downside of this conduit is that this breaks the synchronicity of Apocalypse and the new Unholy Strike. Unholy Strike also has the 75-second cooldown. That's your talent that generates 4 wounds that you can then pop with Apocalypse. Apocalypse pops 4 wounds. So this does not work with that synergy, so that's something to bear in mind. Again, even perhaps you could use this to build around a 1-minute thing where you're just going to be spamming Epidemics and not getting cooldown reduction and Dark Transformation. But every 1 minute you want to pop an Apocalypse, a Dark Transformation, and then every 3 times you're going to have that sync up with your Gargoyle. I think it's an interesting one. I know I've talked about this one an awful lot, but one of the big things for me about the Unholy DK and having played it is that you have lots of cooldowns, and their cooldowns don't actually sync up all that well. So anything that affects that could have a massive impact on the rotation. So do bear that in mind. Embrace Death is next. This gives Sudden Doom, or makes Sudden Doom also increase the damage of your next Death Coil by 40%. That goes up to 100% bonus. So that makes your talent, that makes Sudden Doom proc more often, obviously a lot more appealing. This does not appear to work with Epidemic, so this is about that pure single target damage of Death Coil. I mean, at max rank, Death Coil is doing twice as much damage, so that's pretty good. And definitely makes some of those Death Coil talents and builds a lot more appealing, so quite an interesting one. Eternal Hunger is next. This one looks really great. Dark Transformation's duration is increased by 5 seconds. That goes up to 15 seconds of extra duration. So, amazing. I mean, by default, it's lasting 15 seconds. So you can double the duration, it looks like, which is just extremely, extremely good. Lots more AoE damage out of your pet. Absolutely gotta love that one. And of course, we do have, you can reduce the cooldown of Dark Transformation every time that you do Death Coil. We have a Legendary that increases the duration by an additional 2 seconds every time we Death Coil. So you could potentially get almost 100% uptime on Dark Transformation by setting up your build correctly, which would be pretty nuts and pretty powerful. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on. And then finally, we have Lingering Plague, where Scourge Strike extends the duration of your Virulent Plague by 0.3 seconds. The scaling on this, I'm not sure what the scaling on this is in particular. Looks kind of nuts. Basically, like that seems like it scales up extremely high. So I'm not sure what the deal with that is. Looks like it could go as high as like an extra, maybe 4 seconds every time you Scourge Strike, something like that, which is insane. Not too exciting though. I will say it's not too exciting. It just means you're going to press Outbreak less often. Which is kind of nice in single target, but pretty bland, I would say, on the whole. So it's only okay, I think. Could be a little bit awkward if you don't have Death and Decay up and you're not cleaving with your Scourge Strike. You could have to just recast Outbreak anyway because it's going to fall off some mobs in AoE. So the extra duration is not going to be that worthwhile. So this one is only okay, I think, but could be very nice for single target. Could end up being okay in terms of tuning. But there you go. Some interesting conduits, I think, for sure, for the Death Knight. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Unholy Death Knight. So what do I think of the spec? Is it fun to play? Is it a good spec? Well, like I said with all the Death Knight specs so far, I definitely think this is the expansion of the Death Knight. It's looking like Shadowlands. Oh man, Blizzard sat down, they said Shadowlands is the death-themed expansion. Let's make Death Knights amazing. Because they certainly have. Love all the stuff they've added in, like the extra rune forges. Super cool, gives so much flavor to the class. I love the sacrificial pact, you know, exploding your ghoul. Definitely has some downsides for the Unholy DK, but it's still awesome. But then you can obviously resummon him pretty easily. Getting Lichborn baseline, so breaking free of fears and charms and sleeps. That's really nice, and being able to self-heal with your death coil. Anti-magic zone, what a phenomenal piece of group utility. So good. All that stuff is fantastic. And then some of these baseline things coming in for the Death Knight as well. Baseline summon Gargoyle. Your mastery now affecting the damage of your pets. Apocalypse getting the reduced cooldown. I think that stuff's really great. And of course, lots of improvements to your talent tree. Lots of things going on there. Yeah, I think stuff is looking pretty damn good for the Unholy DK. I think that the spec at its core, it's certainly a very interesting one. It's a very interesting one. There's a lot of ramp up, a lot of planning that goes into it. I mean, I only have a couple of days to make each of these videos because we're covering every single spec. I spent quite a bit of time then trying out the Unholy Death Knight because this was a spec that took me a little bit of time to get my head around. You know, you've got all these cool... I don't even think I have my head fully around this because you can really do a lot of planning with this. You've got loads of cooldowns. And one of the weird things for sure, I talked about this in the Conduits that can affect the cooldowns. Your cooldowns don't necessarily sync up. Like you've got your 3-minute Summon Gargoyle, your 8-minute Army of the Dead. You've got your 1.3 minute Apocalypse, your 45-second Unholy Blight, your 1-minute Dark Transformation. Like you've got loads and loads and loads of cooldowns with this spec. And they don't all sync up perfectly, so you kind of have to make those decisions in terms of like playing through a dungeon, which is where I'm doing most of my testing. You know, going through the dungeon and going, okay, how much do I delay each cooldown by? Is it going to make sense to delay them? Are we going into a boss fight? Do I want to use them on this mob pack? I mean, certainly I struggled a bit with Unholy DK and going, oh, big mob pack, I'm going to pop my cooldowns, but then other party members pop the cooldowns, and because they're owning like pretty low level dungeons, even though we're in pretty bad gear, those mobs still blew up, and then you felt a bit bad. You know, you popped all your cooldowns and the stuff was dead and you felt, oh nuts. That was a bit disappointing. But I think that's certainly not going to be a problem with a more experienced group. But compared it to Frost DK is just upfront, straightforward damage. That certainly works really well in, you know, in these lower tier content. So that is something definitely to be aware of. But I think when you do play the Unholy Death Knight properly, it's going to be very rewarding. You know, ramping up properly, getting all your cooldowns working together properly, it's going to be very appealing, which I think is cool. It's a unique spec. And all that technicality to it of applying the wounds, popping the wounds, making sure your CDs are strung together properly. I like it. I have to say, I like it a lot. Again, just the concern would be that it could be a bit cumbersome in certain types of content. You know, when you've got a good group in Mythic Plus and you've got a good plan and it's a high level Mythic Plus, it's going to work great. In a raid, it's probably going to work just fine. But in world content in lower level Mythic Plus, it could be a little bit cumbersome. So just do bear that in mind. That is the downside. But the upside is it's a very cool spec, and you've got awesome stuff like Anti-Magic Zone is phenomenal. You got the Execute now and Soul Reaper, which is phenomenal. So it's going to be a powerful spec, I would think, looking at it here in Shadowlands. On top of which, of course, all of your Covenant abilities, I think, are fantastic. It's going to be a tough decision which one that you want. I'm liking the look of stacking Defile with the Death's Due with the Night Fae. I think that looks really good for Unholy DK. So we will have to see. And yeah, I think it's a good set of legendaries too. So I'm certainly intrigued. I think it's a fun spec, you know. It's a weird spec. It's a different spec. And I have to say that I really appreciate this. And it's definitely a spec that I still feel like some of these specs, you pick them up, you play them for like 10 minutes, and you go, okay, cool, I get it. You know, I get it now. It makes sense. I'm there. I'm with you. I think with the Unholy Death Knight, there's definitely a lot more depth to the spec. There's a lot more technical stuff that you can do with it, with that planning stuff, which is very appealing for sure. You know, if you're interested in that, if you want a spec, you know, a melee spec with a bit of complexity, you know, the thinking man's melee spec, I'd say, this is the spec for you. I think it's good. And there you go, guys. That is the Unholy Death Knight. I liked it, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.